Welcome back to Meanwhile in Florida, Woke AF News. And if you got a moment, go ahead and give us a like and subscribe. And let's begin by remembering the immortal words of an icon, one Frederick Douglass. If there's no struggle, there is no progress. We'll come back to this later. And introducing our secret word of the day, our special guest.
Today's secret word.
Today's secret word is...
Let's try it. The rest of the day, whenever anyone says a secret word, scream real loud. Ready?
But for now, let's see what in the world is happening around the Sunshine State with a few what the Florida moments. Summertime has arrived, and with it there are few things better than getting a scoop of two of mouth-watering ice cream. Because as the old saying goes, there's always room for ice cream, which shouldn't be confused with revenge is best served on a cold platter. Regardless, just make sure you don't get caught with your pants down, which is exactly how our first scoop of the day oozed out. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, you may have heard of that internet craze of licking ice cream and leaving it for someone to buy, but have you heard of the Florida-tastic craze of picking your nose and pissing your rival's ice cream and letting them sell it?
Done.
Of course you haven't, unless you live right here in sunny Florida, where it's already yesterday's news thanks to one Young Son Wipak of Indian Shores, who was caught on camera entering an adjoining business to her store through a linked bathroom. And I'm sad to report she took her fecal matters into her very messy hands by skipping past the employees must wash their hands signs, picking her nose, and urinating in multiple ice cream containers. As a matter of fact, Young Son Wipak was packing a punch that destroyed more than $2,000 worth of equipment and mouth-watering treats before heading on back next door to work. Later, once evidence of her midday runs were shared with authorities, Wipak was arrested and charged with criminal mischief, violating Florida's Anti-Tampering Act, and being a gosh damn ridiculous disgrace at the worst time of year. In other news, we take a Meanwhile in Florida exclusive look into a little-known forgotten Avenger and master of the dark arts himself, one that selflessly found himself in an impossible task when surrounded in a lair that is known to inhabit some of the world's most terrifying, vicious, and strange creatures. Of course, we're talking about Walmart.
Johnny, punch her face.
Not the kid too! Don't teach the...
Punch her.
Just give me a moment. Oh God. Yep, another reason I haven't shopped there in 10 years. But moving on. And that is exactly where I found our not so noble, sober or useful Avenger known as Vampire Hunter Damien, where when he found himself surrounded by merciless hordes of the what the army, he had no choice but to remember his training, focus his thoughts, reach into the kitchen section, and cast a powerful magical incantation. In other words, Vampire Hunter Damien opened a salt container and poured it out into a circle in hopes that the evil spirits would soon disperse. They didn't. Rather, they looked on in their typical Walmart, undisturbed by anything demeanor. Because it's Walmart. At least until Vampire Hunter D was whisked away by the store manager, whom promptly notified the local paladins of the Blue and Red Order, who later found our Avenger passed out, or, for continuity's sake, regenerating his mana behind the encampment of Walmart, aka he passed out in the woods behind the store, which meant that it wasn't hard for him to be found, captured, and detained for not only failing his mission, but also trespassing on Walmart property after the manager told him to leave. The manager also pressed charges on Vampire Hunter Damien, something that may break his bank account, but surely not his resolve to best that vortex of humanity's lost souls known as Walmart. And in our Zeitgeist Moments, 3 stories we don't have time to go over, but you should hear about. Conservative icon George Will. Young voters will now consider the GOP the dumb party. Confederate monument in Nashville vandalized with the words, "They were racist."
It's funny because it's true.
Never forget the first ever Pride Parade was a riot against police brutality. Now to our main story, which will start with nothing less than congratulations to one and all, for the time is upon us that we must congratulate those who strove through adversity, sleepless nights, anxiety-inducing exams, personal life struggles, and in the end, they persevered. Yes, parents, family, friends, it's graduation season, and this is that special time of year when your many, many years of positive influence, telling your loved ones that they're special, to do their best, to treat others as they'd like to be treated, is capitalized before they go into the world. This is when they are no longer looked at as children, but their time to stand up, behave as adults, to change the world for better, and always speak truth.
To Trayvon Martin, Tammy Rice, and all the other children who became victims of injustice.
Unless you're Rooha Haghar, whose shining moment was cut short in order to make way for a jarring dose of institutional racism. That's right, institutional racism. Institutional racism. Institutional. Are you done? Now that we've reached our super secret word of the day, let's give a proper description of what we are talking about. Shanti.
Hi, guys.
Would you please?
Sure. Institutional racism, also known as institutionalized racism, is a form of racism expressed in the practice of social and political institutions, as distinct from racism by individuals or informal social groups. It is reflected in disparities regarding criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education, among other things. Are we going to go over all of these today?
No. We don't want their heads to explode more than it already is. In this episode, we'll try to focus on institutional racism in schools while remembering they're all connected, and you'll likely see stories that touch not just the education system, but others listed as well. Thank you.
You're welcome, Osiris.
Drinks later?
Sure.
Thank you, Shanti. You see, discrimination, more importantly institutionalized discrimination, whether racist...
It's racist to have a white Santa, you know? And by the way, for all you kids watching at home, Santa just is white, but this person is just arguing that maybe we should also have a black Santa. But, you know, Santa is what he is, and just so you know, we're just debating this because someone wrote about it, kids. Okay, I wanted to get that straight. But Jedediah...
Sexist.
Actually, as you were reading the script, did you ever think, why are all these women in here? I thought this was supposed to be a man's movie.
No. Homophobic.
The government should do their job. Right. Instead of running radar on the interstate, why don't you go arrest some queers? How about that?
Religious.
Every Muslim is a terrorist. Period. Right now. Shut your mouth. I don't want to hear your mouth.
Or xenophobic.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. And some, I assume, are good people.
Isn't only found in far-off places like China, Sudan, Russia, and Israel. No, it seeps into just about any culture, country, or group due to downright ignorance, suspicion, jealousy, or just plain evil. But why did Rooha make a statement about injustice in the United States after fleeing it in Iran? Why did she use her moment as the voice of her generation to speak about Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin, two young boys that she never knew and will never meet? What makes her care when others choose not to? And what does she see that many in our society can't or choose not to? I believe a little backstory is needed. First, when she isn't on stage with the title of brightest student of her class, this is Rooha Haghar, who may seem like any young adult of her generation. Nonetheless, she is a driven, intelligent, and captivating first-generation Iranian refugee. A refugee whose family fled their homeland because of Iranian state-sanctioned persecution. Persecution which over more than 100 years has hardened, become institutionalized, and once institutionalized will harass without pause, persecute without remorse, and kill without a conscience. As a matter of fact, no less than 20,000 innocent Baha'is, their leadership, children, and anyone regardless of age or occupation, including both of Rooha's great-grandfathers, were ultimately murdered by the state because of their Baha'i faith. If you've never heard of the Baha'i faith, you should before we go any further. So you'll understand exactly what is happening in Iran, how institutionalized discrimination works, and how to look for it even here. Take it away, Barbara.
The Baha'is are a worldwide religious faith. In recent weeks in Iran, 16 members of the Baha'is that we know about were hanged. They were executed in spite of an appeal for clemency by President Reagan. Those killed included 3 teenage girls, plus this entire family. They died in Iran for their faith. And here with a report on this modern-day martyrdom is Bob Brown. Bob?
Barbara, the fundamentalist Muslim government in Iran has displayed an intense hatred of the Baha'is that stems in part from how the tenets of the faith differ from Islam, sometimes radically. Among other things, the Baha'is believe in equality of the sexes, eventual world government, universal education, and in practicing their religion without clergy, all concepts that have infuriated Iran's leaders. In general, the Baha'is practice a gentle faith that advocates meeting violence with serenity. And in Iran today, that tenet of the Baha'i faith is being tested in the extreme. This is a photograph of leaders of the Baha'i faith in Iran, including the entire membership of the Baha'i National Spiritual Assembly. All but one are now dead, executed, or missing and presumed dead.
I was surprised that the execution took place so quickly. My mother and the rest of the members of the National Assembly, they were in prison for 2 weeks only before they were executed.
Ramna Mahfoudi now lives in the United States. Her mother, an Iranian physicist and meteorologist, was killed in December of 1981. Her father, an Iranian television personality, simply vanished a year and a half before her mother's execution.
I don't know who pulled the trigger. A Muslim god, most likely. Whoever it was, he was doing a job for his government in the name of Islam, for the Islamic government of Iran. And they have no shame to cover that up at all, because we are the infidels.
I don't know who pulled the trigger. A Muslim guard, most likely. Whomever it was, he was doing a job for his government in the name of Islam, for the Islamic government of Iran. And they have no shame to cover that up at all because we are the infidels. It's chilling words from a woman that was never able to say goodbye to her mother, her father, and perhaps countless other family and friends. Martyrs of persecution based on nothing more than their will to exist in an inclusive, diverse, and tolerant society, knowing full well their neighbors, teachers, politicians, and supposed civil guardians see tolerance, inclusion, and equality as wicked. Thus, the Baha'i have been terrorized so long in Iran that perhaps like many societies that practice institutionalized discrimination, once a few generations have passed, it becomes normalized. And those persecuting the minority no longer even remember why they distrust, harass, hate, and kill. If left unchecked, this behavior will become the status quo, and once there, as it took generations to rise to that level, it will likely also take generations to correct. Mirroring minorities' history here in the United States of America, the Baha'i have countless stories of being treated as second-class citizens, stories of unwarranted arrest, false imprisonment, beatings, torture, unjustified executions, confiscation and destruction of property owned by individuals in the Baha'i community, denial of employment, the inability to attain high-earning jobs, the denial of government benefits, denial of civil rights and liberties, and denial of access to higher education. As recent as 2011, the Baha'i international community issued a report documenting reporters in Iranian media in which the Baha'i faith was branded deviant, a misguided cult, and its followers Satanist. A common phrase to describe them is filthy, dark, and foul beyond comparison. These dehumanizing tactics aren't on accident. Again, when institutionalizing discrimination, one must first make the target or victims of said discrimination appear worthy of it or less human, so that the rest of society will allow it to happen. At least we have a conscience and stop what we all know to be wrong. The Baha'i have been branded countless derogatory words, from dogs to deviant, misguided, Satanist, foul, infidels, unclean, blasphemous, cult followers, and the list goes on. Question: can you think of any dehumanizing language used by hardline conservatives here in the United States of America? Now, this can be phrases, words, and jokes against minorities that mirror the demeaning terms conservative Shia Iranians use when speaking of the Baha'i minority. What? Wait. You don't think we're capable of dehumanizing a group here in the same way? Interesting. How about the words ape, thug, lazy, baboon, dog, coon, menace to society, welfare queen, low IQ, holy shit, naga, and let's not forget
super predators, no conscience, no empathy.
A quick Google search will give you a litany of terms that I didn't even know existed. But there they are, in black and white, heard on your video, and in our daily lives. Truth be told, I wasn't even aware that there were so many. But all of them have been used to dehumanize people of African descent and minorities here in the United States. You know, not Iran. Can you think of any places this immoral culture has been cultivated? Can you think of any places it hasn't? The education system, perhaps, where generational discrimination can be found. It's been taught. It's being taught. Generations after May 17, 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously voted 9-0, stating that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal and therefore violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, striking down institutionalized policies that disenfranchise countless minorities throughout the United States of America. Although that decision was handed down in a most resounding way, institutionalized racism has continued to seep through our society and education system. It's adapted in new and more sinister ways. By closing down and underfunding certain schools, by creating a new form of segregation through voucher plans that dismember already struggling school districts, which ensures tax dollars go to private schools that accept public funds, but openly deny students from the general public. It has continued through the teachers and administrators that disproportionately punish minorities, and yes, some police officers that arrest students as young as 9 years old for cell phone use and clothes violations, and thus continue the classroom to prison pipeline. You see, institutionalized racism is taught, if not indoctrinated here, and unfortunately, is accepted by a significant portion of society, much like Iran. Now, this isn't in any way a comparison of the Baha'i persecution to the American of African descent or minority experience. It's not a competition. Rather, this is an opportunity to acknowledge the similarities both Iran and the United States of America have employed when dealing with a minority group that isn't a threat, but is treated like one. Now, let's go back and revisit Rama Mahmoud's words once more. Because if you didn't notice, they sound eerily familiar, like something we may hear here in the United States of America. What? Again, you don't believe that elements of our culture could mirror a place like Iran. Okay, but this time let's remove the words Iran and Islam and see if it sounds anything like anything familiar that you may have heard here. I don't know who pulled a trigger. A guard, most likely. Whomever it was, he was doing a job for his government, in the name of the government. And they have no shame to cover that up at all, because we are the infidels.
3 Chicago police officers are charged with an alleged cover-up in connection with the deadly shooting of a black teenager.
I don't know who pulled a trigger.
16! City's police superintendent was fired.
A guard, most likely.
David March and officers Joseph Walsh and Thomas Gaffney are each charged with felony counts of conspiracy, official misconduct, and obstruction of justice.
Whomever it was, he was doing a job for his government.
He is a police officer who was convicted for doing his job.
In the name of the government.
While they are sworn to serve and protect as well as uphold the law, they are not above the law.
Today, justice was not served.
And they have no shame to cover that up at all.
That the state has failed to meet its burden on all charges. Therefore, there is a finding of not guilty as to every count and each defendant of conspiracy, official misconduct, and obstruction of justice.
Because we are the infidels.
We all watched that video. We read the reports that Officer Walsh, Officer Gaffney, and Detective Marsh put. They falsified those police reports. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand what they did was illegal. They tried to get Jason Van Dyke off. They tried to cover for them.
Oh, look who's back. Did you learn anything? Let me put my tea down. You see, institutionalized discrimination, racism, or what have you's patterns are pretty similar anywhere you go in the world, unless you don't want to see them. But that's exactly what Rooha was speaking to. Something we all know is happening. Something our country has been doing so long that many of its citizens aren't even aware they're guilty of it. Accomplices to it, or guardians of it, much like in Iran. Back to our heroine Rooha, born in a foreign country into a minority faith, surrounded by a conservative hardline interpretation of Sharia Islam. The followers of the Baha'i faith were quickly branded as blasphemous, their religion considered a cult, and attacked. As infidels, it's safe to say that Rooha understands exactly what institutionalized discrimination looks like and can lead to when ingrained into a society. You see, after immigrating to a new country and finding herself alien to everything, including the English language, some would think that Rooha would fall behind in her studies. But on the contrary, in just a few years, she would find herself valedictorian of Emmett J. Conrad High School. Pretty good for a girl that was not allowed to actually learn in Iran. Now, as you may know, valedictorians are given a few things to showcase their achievement as the brightest student of their class. Tassels, a front row seat on the big stage, and most importantly, the ability to be the voice of their generation. But before delivering her graduation speech, Rooha Haghar, a refugee, a woman, and a minority whose voice was silenced in Iran, then fled to the United States where freedom of speech is extolled, found herself in an eerily familiar situation when she was silenced again. You see, it can happen just that quick. And if you're not paying attention, or you don't know what to look for, you'll likely miss it. And that's the moment when our story goes from purely inspiring to purely, what the f***? When Rooha asked her principal, Timoshin Asmaran, what happened to the mic, he simply replied, some sort of technical issue. Clearly a lie. Recounting the lead up to her graduation, Rooha met with the principal Asmaran, and after a review of her speech, was told that invoking the names of Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice would incite anger towards white people. And thus the names were to be censored. Oh, I'm sorry, silenced. Oh, sorry, they should be taken out. She went on to say, he advised me to take that line out completely, which she did. but not before memorizing the lines and including them when she spoke that graduation day. As Principal Ashmaron urged that she revise her speech to honor all the children who became victims of injustice. All the children. Sound familiar? Because these children's lives don't matter as much as all children's lives matter. Is it just me, or does that sound familiar? Rooha's principal wanted her to make broad and vague strokes about society rather than invoking specifics like Tamir Rice. You know, the 12-year-old boy that was playing in a park alone when a police car sped towards him, jumped a curve, immediately producing an armed officer named Timothy Loman, gun drawn, who would immediately shoot Tamir Rice point blank. A little innocent boy murdered in a whopping 1.7 seconds upon arrival. No warning, no understanding of what's happening, why he'd been shot, why his blood was staining the white park snow beneath him as Officer Timothy Loman watched. And later, and the worst of all, no justice for the murdered 12-year-old Tamir Rice, whom that day died alone in a park. Ashmaron would go further, instructing Rooha to remove any mention of Trayvon Martin. You know, the 17-year-old Florida teen who was found guilty of multiple charges, including walking to a local 7-Eleven, purchasing and transporting a bag of Skittles, drinking an Arizona tea, and minding his own damn business. And let's not forget, wearing a hoodie while walking back home after sundown. All actions that shouldn't worry a person. But let's not forget, we're talking about institutionalized racism, and in such a culture, all of these very normal actions can somehow be deemed offensive, reason for suspicion, to harass, and yes, murder or stand your ground. Which is why Trayvon Martin never made it home from the corner store that day, because he was murdered by one George Zimmerman, alias the darling of domestic violence, alias Mr. Confederate Flag Memorabilia, the man that would later be charged with stalking, harassment, making death threats, and let's not forget auctioning off the gun he murdered Trayvon Martin with. Yes, that George Zimmerman of countless mugshots told a local Sanford dispatch officer while profiling innocent Trayvon Martin, "This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something." Which is exactly what I think when I see kids eating Skittles, especially the dark ones. Nonetheless, after several minutes of stalking innocent teen Trayvon Martin, who was simply walking in his own neighborhood, Trayvon found himself being chased by an unknown, overtly suspicious Zimmerman, who was still on the phone and recorded saying to the local dispatch officer, whom already told him earlier to stop following Trayvon, "These assholes, they always get away." Now, I nor anyone other than Zimmerman have any idea why Trayvon was an asshole, as he did nothing wrong, was walking home in his neighborhood, but unabated by the dispatch officer that told him to stop chasing Trayvon, Zimmerman knew better, continued to chase him. He had a feeling. He confronted Trayvon, assaulted Trayvon, tried to restrain him from resisting his chase, which led to Zimmerman murdering innocent Trayvon Martin in cold blood. Institutionalized. By the way, both of them were found not guilty of murder, and thus our little story of institutionalized racism continues, at least until someone takes a stand and speaks about it, which in our open-minded, flag-waving, freedom of speech-loving society should happen without pause, right? Wrong. Again, Rooha Haghar on speaking about Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin. I never expected to be silenced. The consequences I was expecting to face was them holding my diploma or having a conversation with my principal. Haghar told NBC5, I never expected them to not allow me to finish. Because at the end of the day, schools want to raise socially conscious students. Students who are able to think for themselves. That's what I was doing. Silly girl. But no one knows where she'd get a crazy idea like that. It's not like the principal that cut her mic on that day was telling her to be a courageous voice on another, right? I mean, there's no way he'd blatantly show dumbfounding hypocrisy on an institutional level for all to see, reinforcing this whole point of discrimination on an institutional level against a minority who is a refugee speaking about murdered minorities being a minority himself, right? Right? Well, in Mr. Ashmaron's words, our diversity has been the foundation of our strength. It is with pride that we commit to serving the families from all over the world with clear conviction that the contribution of our students to the communities will transform our future. Our staff understands the role they play in supporting each student, and they don't take that trust lightly. It is our conviction that all students can achieve greatness, given an opportunity and the right support. Yes, that's exactly what we as a society extol, are our virtues and what we all want future leaders to do. Unless you protest, challenge the status quo, complain about discrimination, or point out a system that has taken generations to create, and under no circumstances should you ever acknowledge the countless examples of systematic discrimination and racism this country has lived, fought against, and like other countries around the world, is still fighting today. In other words, it is up to us to create a world and country many extol the virtues of, but too many generation after generation can achieve due to ignorance, discrimination, bigotry, hate, and downright evil. Will we continue this farce of sorts, ignoring what we know is happening because as long as it doesn't affect you, meh, isn't my problem? Do we go backwards, repeat the mistakes of the past, dare I say, make America great again? Or do we live by Rooha Haghar's example, overcoming adversity, striving to be better, and not only to ourselves, but to one another, whether we've met someone or never will? Do we show compassion and empathy to follow our world citizens' plight? In other words, do we march forward and show that we can overcome, that dreams will be possible, and dare I say, do we make America great for all? Time will tell, folks. Institutionalized racism will not give up without a fight. And as Frederick Douglass said, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. But I, for one, feel better knowing that there are others like Rooha Haghar. Join us. Be a voice. Well, that does it for this episode, folks. Make sure you check back for new content, as there will always be something new to talk about. And if you like, subscribe. Regardless, I'm going to keep doing these. Good luck. God bless. Take care of one another, and peace.